each week, It's Happening Out commits to the road to Stonewall, the march to Stonewall, of celebrating gay icons that have helped bring us to this point in our lives and our history of gay civil rights. Tonight, we are celebrating Bayard Rustin. And I have to say, until Aaron brought him to my attention and our attention this week, I had never heard of him, and I'm really glad you did.
It only took me 18 weeks to bring some intersectionality to the show.
Yes. Well, if you just said to say something interesting, then yes, I agree. No, I'm only
Nice
kidding.
try,
Of
nice
course,
try.
you're right.
You tried.
I did. I tried
It's okay.
to shot.
Napoleon's not here. You had to, fill in for
Exactly
him.
right. Bayard Rustin was a gay black activist as early as the 1940s, coming out of World War II. And he was asked repeatedly his thoughts about sexual orientation rights and black civil rights. And Bayard Rustin was very involved in the civil rights movement with Martin Luther King, Dr. King, in the early 1960s, and was asked many things about joining gay rights movement in the early 90s with the civil rights movement, and frequently rejected that idea. He was very focused in the gay rights movement and did many, many different things, which we want to bring him to your attention. So each of our hosts is going to tell you something about Bayard Rustin and some of the things that he said. Let's begin with Power.
Well, Bayard Rustin helped to organize the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, that famous march that took place with Martin Luther King on the I Have a Dream speech. And he also worked to bring the AIDS crisis to the attention of the NAACP. Now, quote from Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin said, "Every indifference to prejudice is suicide. Because if I don't fight all bigotry, bigotry itself will be strengthened, and sooner or later, it will return on me."
Interesting. Aaron.
Well, by the 1950s, Rustin was actually an expert organizer of human rights protests 10 years before the March on Washington. In 1958, he actually played an important role coordinating a march in England in which 10,000 attendees demonstrated against nuclear weapons. So he was kind of multifaceted in his activism. Bayard Rustin said, "When an individual is protesting society's refusal to acknowledge his dignity as a human being, his very act of protest confers dignity on him."
Carlos.
Well, I have to be honest, I didn't know about him. I'm that gay. So thank you for bringing him to me. And I did a little research. I practice meditation and some Buddhism. I'm a little bit of all, but I love the fact that he studied under Gandhi. And it wasn't until he was photographed with Gandhi that the whole press took over and exploded, he exploded all over the press because they were saying that Gandhi, they just were not happy with it at all. And Bayard Rustin said, "Every gay who's in the closet is ultimately a threat to the freedom of gays. I don't want to seem intolerant to them, and I think we have to say that to them with a great deal of affection. But remaining in the closet is the other side of prejudice against gays, because until you challenge it, you're not playing an active role in fighting it."
Yeah, that's awesome. That's an awesome observation. And Josie.
Well, Bayard Rustin, you heard, was hanging out with Martin Luther King, but he was actually his key advisor during the civil rights movement. Bayard Rustin said, "We need in every Bay and community a group of angelic troublemakers."
I love that word, angelic troublemakers. Yes. Bayard Rustin was really interesting to me this week in learning about him because in a time period that you could not be black, in a time period where you certainly couldn't be gay, he was the worst of all, a black gay. And for him to be so centric in activism and being so closely associated with Dr. Martin Luther King, I think is fascinating. And the fact that, frankly, I didn't know about him is a reflection of why the Stonewall celebration of 50 years is so critically important. I am distressed as I learn about him, and again, I thank you, that probably the majority of gay men under 30 years old may not even know what Stonewall is or couldn't identify where Stonewall actually physically existed, much less explain what really happened and why it's important to the gay community. It distresses me, and why we're so committed to doing this each week. I have to say to you then, Bayard Rustin said, "If people do not organize in the name of their interest, the world will not take them as being serious. And that is the chief reason that every person who is gay should join some gay organization. Because he must prove to the world that he cares about his own freedom first. People will never fight for your freedom if you have not given evidence that you are prepared to fight for it yourself." Bayard Rustin is our gay icon on our march to Stonewall, and we will do this every week until June 30th in our 50th celebration of the Stonewall riots and the civil rights struggle of America's gay community that is being celebrated by the entire world in June of 2019.